Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Mohit Bakaya, and I'm trying to get rid of something on the screen. Brilliant. My name's Mohit Bakaya, and I'm the controller of Radio 4 and 4 Extra, and I'm your chair today. And we're here to discuss the ongoing challenge of investment in Black, Asian, and minority ethnic creative entrepreneurship and organizations, specifically to explore whether the picture post-COVID and BLM can be different to the situation before 2020. And I'm joined by an illustrious panel who I will let introduce themselves to you in a minute. But first, I thought I might just give you a little roadmap of what we're going to do over the next hour. So firstly, as you might expect, I think we should try and identify the problem we face and discuss what we think the main barriers have been in the past, both from a funding body point of view, but also from policymakers and some of the creative entrepreneurs and organizations involved. Secondly, I think we should, as I alluded to earlier, talk about the last 12 months and how both COVID and the way it's signified kind of racial disparities, but also Black Lives matters, and how that has also put a kind of focus on systemic racism and deeper issues, how they might help us rethink and reframe the questions we're asking and the solutions we're seeking. And then finally, I want to focus on those solutions. And the solutions bit is very important to me because, as I said at the beginning, I'm controller of Radio 4. And one of the things, I've been doing it for about just over a year now, and one of the things I've been very keen to do is try and bring as much constructive journalism to the network as possible. And that's about trying to get away from the endless recriminations and the same old arguments and blame and counter-blame, and trying to actually work together to find ways forward. And I really hope that over the next hour we can do that over this issue, over the issue of chronic underfunding for BAME organizations, because this is obviously a very important issue that I know we all care about, and that's what I hope we will do. Anyway, but before we move on, I hope that's clear. I'll let the main panel introduce themselves. I'm thinking starting with Francis.
Hi everybody, I'm Francis Runacres. I'm the Executive Director of Enterprise Innovation at the Arts Council. I'm the first and only post holder for that post. And I'm just about to approach my 21st birthday at the Arts Council, so I've been there a while. Before that, I had about 18 years at PricewaterhouseCoopers, so I've straddled the commercial and not-for-profit sectors, mostly in corporate recovery work there. And I'm also a trustee of the Tudor Trust, which is one of the large private grant-making trusts. And I find it particularly useful to be able to see how grant-making investing is done, both in the public sector, but also in the trust and foundation sector. So that's me.
Super, thank you, Francis. Caroline.
Hello, I'm Caroline Mason, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Esmée Fairbairn Foundation. Previous to that, I was involved in the whole area of social investment, impact investing, and prior to that, I was in financial services and worked for Reuters for 12 years. I am really glad to be here, and I'm really hoping to learn a great deal as well, and listen and learn, as well as hopefully contribute some of the work that Esmée is doing in this area and some of the challenges that it's had.
Lovely, thank you, Caroline. Jen.
Hi, I'm Jen Maitland Hudson. I'm Deputy CEO of Social Investment Business. Social Investment Business is as the name would suggest, a social investor. We're also a grant maker, but we don't distribute our own funds. We work with partners, and I can always say a bit more about who those partners are and have been. But we have the largest amounts of money that we have distributed have been government funds of one kind or another. I used to be an academic, and then I moved into the social sector, founded a social enterprise myself, ran that for a few years, and it is still running. One of the proudest things I've ever done is to found that and hand it on to someone else who's done a much better job than I ever could have done. And we, let's say we're really concerned about these kinds of questions, about the distribution of funding. We have done quite a bit of data collection that looks into this, and I'm really interested to share the information that we have and to hear from Francis and Caroline about what it looks like from their perspective, and in general to debate this conversation, this subject in a lively way. Thanks very much for having me.
Thanks, Jen. You're very welcome. So that's your main panel. I'm going to describe the next people as the sub-panel, which seems a bit rude. So I'm going to call them panel 1B, because I think that's probably a fairer way of describing them. But they're going to be part of the conversation, not as prominently as the people you've just heard from, but I'm hoping they will join in the conversation and make points as and when they feel they have something to say. And so I'm going to start with Andrew. Andrew, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Mohit. My name is Andrew Missingham. I'm the co-founder of the management consultancy BNA. We work for a world of cultural, charitable, profitable enterprise. So our clients come from all of those three worlds, including from the kind of for-profit and corporate world, Nike, Kellogg, Lego, Discord, Samsung, from the charitable world, people like Mary Stopes International, and from the culture world, clients like the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra and Punch Drunk. We have bases in London, Portland, Oregon, New York, and Shanghai. And I'm also very proud to be a board member at UD, United Development, a Black music organisation based in East London.
Lovely. Thank you, Andrew. Natalie. Sorry, I caught you on the hop there.
Hi there, I'm Nats from Small Green Shoots, as you can see. We champion diverse young people from low-income backgrounds getting careers in arts and the creative industries. We've been going now for 10 years. We have a 69% Black female board and a 78% Black cohort of staff members. We did this by accident. Because that's just the kind of organisation that we are. And yeah, I'm really, really glad to be here. I also am a co-founder of The Cat's Mother, which is a female-focused, again, Black-led initiative, which supports women getting careers and achieving in their careers in the music industry.
Thanks, Nat. James.
Hi everyone. So I'm James Doser. I'm a freelance research consultant based here in London in the UK. And I'm the co-author of the research report, co-author with Kevin Osborne of MeWe 360, which I think has been the sort of starting piece for this discussion. So what I'll do is I'll share a link to that research in the chat for everyone to explore at their leisure.
Thanks, James. And finally, Faraz.
Hi all, my name's Fairbairn Osman. I am the MD of a fairly new and small production company called Goldwaller. We make video and audio for a range of partners, including TV and podcasts for obviously the BBC and some public partners as well as commercial partners as well. In my previous life, I used to be the editor of education at Channel 4, so I was commissioning public money and working with a number of stakeholders. So I've kind of sat on both sides of the table and have seen it through both eyes.
Thank you, Faraz. And that, as they say on Radio 4 audience shows, ladies and gentlemen, is your panel. Unfortunately, you can all applaud, but unfortunately we won't be able to hear you, but do applaud anyway. Okay, so thanks very much. So I'm going to kick off with a pretty obvious question, and I want to come maybe to Francis first on this, which is simply, what for you have been the main barriers to, we know that the funding from the Arts Council is around 2.4%. That doesn't represent the number of BAME people in this country. Why has it stayed so low despite the endless initiatives that I know the Arts Councils and others have been involved in?
Well, thank you for that first question. It's almost impossible to answer.
Well, okay, let me put it another way. What would you say, if you were to pick out one key barrier you've faced, what do you think it is?
I think there's always been, an issue of the Arts Council's not for us, and I think there's an issue there about how, and this is both about people from BAME backgrounds, but also people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and so forth, as to whether the Arts Council is for them, and that's something that we're conscious of. and want to address. So that sense that somehow it's for other people, if you like. So I think there's a cultural, an image thing, if you like, about that. And it needs to be that we are welcoming of applications and so forth. I think, though, perhaps one of the issues is whether people see themselves in the type of stuff that we do. So in the sense of are the programs things they think they could apply to? Are we welcoming and so forth? So I think that's one of the things I see as one of the larger issues. So it's a perception thing as much as a reality thing is what I'm trying to get to. I think we could point to, as you say, a large number of programs that we've run over the years that have tried to get at this, but they haven't yet delivered what we want, which is an equitable distribution of funding to all communities in this country.
That's interesting, because what that seems to imply, and I'm sure you're not saying this solely, but is that the problem lies more with perception and people's engagement with you on your terms, rather than your criteria and processes maybe being more suitable to the Black and Asian community out there. Where do you think there's possibly something about the institutions themselves that are problematic here?
Well, it's a good question. It's interesting. In the report, there was I think there was a comment that said something like, we didn't know about the CRF program or something like that. And I was reflecting on that. CRF program being the Cultural Recovery Fund program that's been the sort of big signature government program around COVID. And I kind of reflected on that and thought, how could that be? We publicised it, very widely, etc. But I accept that we are not often not often, that there are other places we need to show our wares, shall we say. We need to find the places, not the traditional, maybe the channels we're comfortable with. We need to find ways of making it clear that we are open and that we are seeking that more equitable distribution of funding. I saw this in a different context in relation to the Tudor Trust visit I did to Hartlepool. So Hartlepool is a place that we went as an entire organisation to work out why we weren't getting any applications from Hartlepool. And whilst that was not specifically a BAME issue, I'm using it as an analogy. And it was quite interesting talking to people there. And what we found was that they trusted local groups, local funders and things, but they didn't know about a funder from London. And I thought that was quite interesting about how you need to publicise your wares is the best way I can put it. And you think you're doing it, but if you're not getting into the right channels, you're not.
Okay, thanks, Francis. Caroline, what do you think? Do you agree with that? You think it is fundamentally a problem that people don't see themselves as don't identify or perceive themselves in the kind of place they need to be to get funding?
I think our journey has been a slightly different one. I think so. We're nowhere near the size of the Arts Council. We only give out about 40 to 50 million pounds a year. But I think our approach, I think for us, everything that's happened over the last 18 months has been a real wake-up call to us. And I think we suddenly realized that we were part of the problem when we'd always thought we were part of the solution. And I think in particular around the whole Black Lives Matter, our support was, we fund a huge amount of campaigning in the area of injustice and rights. But the race element was implicit in that. We had no explicit recognition or acknowledgement of the very specific and historical issues that are associated with racism in this country. And we were not actively anti-racist.
Look, I want to get on to Black Lives Matters and COVID and the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So if we could just go back, kind of, if you can scroll back to pre-2020 in a way. I mean, I know BLM is that, but what did you, if to ask, put to you the same question I put to Francis at the beginning, if you were to identify what you think has been traditionally, thinking beyond Esmée, Fairbairn, the main barrier, what would you say it's been?
I think it's our system of funding that is very, very traditional. It conflates, flexibility, unrestricted funding, smaller organizations with risk rather than opportunity. It doesn't. So I think it was our systems, our processes, our assumptions about what good looks like that have been the key barrier, I would say.
Francis, what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I should stress when I talked about channels, I mean, that's not the only problem. You asked for one. I mean, I think one of the issues is that how can I put this? I think it's important that people see themselves in the organisations that fund. So what I'm getting at here is making sure that the organisations that fund look like society as well. And the Arts Council's made some significant steps on that. We still got a way to go, but for example, I think something over 25% of our government structure is BAME, so our council members, national and area councils, and I think that kind of thing, is important, that that the communities we're trying to reach see themselves in the funder, and I think that's a really important thing. Our staff group is particularly at the senior level. We've made some steps there to improve the diversity there. Still work to do, but I think that's one of the most important things. And that's what I was trying to get at in my first answer was once you see yourself there, then the things that look complicated, is it the criteria or the forms, become less important. I think. I mean, I'm putting it out that as a suggestion. Now, that's not to say that we can't strive to make our application process, our forms, all of that better all the time.
Sure.
But I think one of the great barriers is not seeing yourself there. And once you start seeing yourself...
And what progress are you making on representation within the Arts Council then?
Well, as I say, I think, over 25% of the governance members, so that's National Council and Area Councils, are BME. We're about 50-50 on male-female at that level. On staff, we're if I get these figures slightly wrong, apologies, I'm doing this from memory. We're around 14% of all staff are from a BAME background, and perhaps as importantly, at the senior leadership group level, it's about 14% as well. I think there might have been true in the past that it was different between all staff and the senior level. So I think that's some of the things we've done. We know we need to go further.
Okay. Sorry, Francis, carry on.
And that there will be all sorts of initiatives on this, and we've been particularly clear in our strategy and our delivery plan, which has just been published. Is we will not ask the sector to do things we're not doing ourselves. I think that is really important. We're not going, oh, you've got to change, chaps out there, the people we fund and so forth. We're saying we need to change as well.
Okay. Jen, what do you think? Do you agree with that?
I think probably from SIB's point of view, I don't. That's not really our experience. So I have some pretty clear data on this. I can give you some very clear examples of where I think there are structural barriers in access to the funding that we've distributed. So in the last year, we have really very good data, because one of the things that we did because of COVID was that we pushed through our ability to collect information, and so we have a lot of transparency over the funds we've distributed in the last 18 months. But to give you one example, our biggest loan fund last year, we had 57 applications from BME organisations, of whom only 12 were found to be eligible, and of those only 4 were approved. So the percentage at each stage, that goes from 27% of the applicant pool down to 10% of the eligible pool and 5% of approved. And that, what I would say about that, I mean, that's a pretty stark set of findings. I would hope everyone thinks that's pretty stark. We have certainly found that pretty stark and have reflected hard on that. But it also is a trend that we see across all of our funds, and all of our funds is quite a diverse set of funds. So our smallest grant in the last 18 months was £5,000. Our biggest loan was £1.5 million. So you're talking there about a wide distribution of funding. I would also say we are not seeing that we are not recognised by BAME groups. So 46% of applicants across all of our programmes in the last year were BAME. So, you know, we're seeing a very significant proportion of the pipeline is of BAME applicants, but that is not reflected then in the approval ratings. So approved ratings is 35%. So that's a 10% drop. And that is a 10% drop in a year that post by Black Lives Matter, we were much more aware and trying much harder to be representative.
But what do you ascribe that to then?
I think there's a few things going on, but one of the things that we definitely see is an issue around eligibility. So that first set of findings we have seen really consistently across our funds, even in funds where there is a genuine attempt to think about eligibility criteria. So we've collected a lot of data about the finances of organisations, both pre and post COVID. And what we see is that Black and ethnic minority-led organisations are far more financially fragile, and that impacts on them very considerably when it comes to eligibility criteria. So I should say we're not specifically an arts funder. We fund organisations from all kinds of backgrounds, lots of community organisations, but there's a decent pool of arts organisations within that. But the findings for BAME applicants are really consistent. So there is a set of really significant structural barriers that mean that these organisations are not even considered. And that's not at the stage of decision making, right? This isn't that these are organisations that get to a decision making point and then there's bias in those decision makers and therefore then they're not approved for funding. That's, I mean, we can come back to that. I think that's a separate issue. But my concern at this point is that those organisations are not getting to the decision makers. What we need to think about is the structural issues in access to funding. And those issues really are structural. They are about the eligibility criteria. They're about our expectations of organisations. They're about the size of organisations, the makeup of organisations, our views about governance, our expectations about track record and networks and reputation. So another thing that we see really strongly in our data is that if you have received funding previously, you're more likely to get funding again. If you have received funding previously, you're more likely to get more funding as a proportion of your overall turnover than if you've never received funding before. Of course, that is, you know, that should be clear, right? That's a vicious circle. You're going to see that pattern continue again and again and again. So if you're talking about a group of organizations that are underfunded, underrepresented, are not in the in crowd, they're not, it's getting in that is the first problem. Once you're in, you may find that actually those reputational effects favor you, but you have to get in. And what we're seeing is a whole lot of organizations that don't get considered. And I think that is, certainly from our perspective, that is by far the biggest issue that we're seeing. And we can discuss all of the other things about decision-making and representation. Those matter too, but you have to be considered, first of all.
So look, I need to, because we've only got an hour, and sounds like we should have had at least 2 for all of this, given how interesting and complex this is. But before we go to the next session, I just want to go to the sub-panel, Faraz or Natalie or James or Andrew. Does that chime with you, what Jen's just said about the kind of that fundamental fragility and what sounds like a need for kind of greater support?
I mean, you probably saw me nodding furiously to everything that Jen was saying then. I think it's not just that. I think that there's also an issue about when you do get funding, what Jen pointed out about people who get funding, get funded again, etc. I think part of that is to do with the fact that BAME companies tend to be much smaller. They're newer. They don't have as much resource. And actually, when it comes to trying to get to funding, my sense is 2 things happen. Number one, it's incredibly convoluted and it requires pretty much somebody on a full-time job to be filling out funding forms and getting it right and doing it in the right way and making sure that they're saying the right things, as well as doing the networking to make sure that when your form does get submitted, it gets seen by the right person and they notice your name and they kind of take it more seriously. And that level of commitment to something that may not turn out to be successful is incredibly perilous for a small company. You've got to make a decision about whether or not you want to be a company that's fully funded by grant funding or somebody that, like myself, is trying to get commissioned work and do it in a more organic way. And then the second thing is that I I also feel like there's a sense of this idea of funding for minority, this might be quite controversial, but it is genuinely how I feel. This idea of funding for smaller companies from other backgrounds is met with a level of skepticism, right? Because it's a sense of like, oh, it's a handout, it must come attached to something. We don't really know what the reality is of why we're getting this money. Like, why are they giving us this money? What is it that they want from us? And, you know, are we going to be handcuffed to something that we're not aware of further down the line? And I think that skepticism of ingrained systems that have been around for a very, very long time, the majority of funders are heritage funders or have been from a philanthropic background. You know, those people aren't connected with the BAME community traditionally, and a sense that it's kind of like this undertone of skepticism that I think can be quite damaging, and mean that you kind of get put off before you even start putting an application in the first place.
Okay, thanks, Faraz. I'm going to have to move on to the next session, actually, because we're just going to run out of time otherwise. Caroline, you were saying earlier that you thought the last 12 months had a kind of dramatic impact on the way you've been thinking about this. Do you want to just expand on that and talk about how you feel the events both of Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd's murder, but also what COVID has clearly thrown up in terms of the iniquities of our society, how that's kind of changed your approach and thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we have done is stopped, and to Jen's point, said what is, because we have exactly the same experience. So how do we switch from being a sort of slightly passive do-gooding type of organization to being proactive about putting organizations into our portfolio that fundamentally challenge our eligibility criteria, our expectations. So we, in the arts in particular, we've allocated 1.5 million to work on the issue of freelancers and diversity. We're proactively looking at finding organizations that would not fit our criteria. I think what we're also very, very conscious of is that, you know, we like a systemic change, but if the entire area has been underinvested in for such a long time, there is no system. There is no system. So how can we help build a new system from the ground up? And I think that will take some time. But if we have a cohort of, say, 40 organizations, then what can we do to help that become the, you know, the new infrastructure that gives that has power in its own right, has voice in its own right, rather than being just a selection of organizations that get a bit of funding. So I think there's something here about being proactive, about recognizing that the fundamental system doesn't exist, and the system and the infrastructure gives you power. It gives you say, it gives you voice. So I think we're thinking about, we have to do both of those things.
Sure. Something which has just come up in the chat, which actually is something which I feel very strongly about, actually, and for me has emerged out of the last 12 months very clearly, is the way in which the overall umbrella BAME may not be entirely helpful, but both generally, but also specifically in terms of the challenges we're discussing today. I'm going to go to Andrew, because Andrew Missing, because I know there's something he kind of has a view on. Andrew, do you agree with the contributor who said that?
I do, and Faraz, I saw your comment on there as well, and you know I contributed to Kevin's very thoughtful, thought-provoking piece about the issue. I think it's very simple. You know, BAME has got 1 syllable, BAME has got 4 syllables, Black and Minority Ethnic has got 8 syllables. Take the time to say the 8 syllables, to just suggest the diversity in the group of people you're talking to. This. And I've heard this phrase used already in this panel, a BAME issue. Sounds very much like the term a black problem, which used to be, you know, uttered. I think we need to be very, very careful about things that conflate different need, different circumstance, different experience. If what we are talking about is diversity, the very phrase has to remind us of the diversity within that, as opposed to lumping people together you know, in a way that is just not helpful and is not going to get us where we need to get to.
Can I just go to Natalie briefly, and then I'll come back to Francis and Jen. What do you think about that? Because obviously, it could, sometimes one can say that people are arguing about language when actually there are more important structural issues to be debated. But do you think the language matters?
You know what, it all matters. I mean, I personally go with the structural thing because, I've got sandpaper skin, to be honest with you, but I do totally understand and back up what Andrew says. To be honest with you, I have a problem with the B in the BAME because Black communities are completely different. If you look at someone from West Indian background, someone from African background, oh my goodness, sometimes it's night and day. I've got 22 kids in my office right now, which is why I'm at home, so I can be here in some quiet. And, some of the kids have a lot more in common because of their low income backgrounds, because of their cultural backgrounds. But whatever it is we're talking about here, I have to say, I really did think this was going to be just another wheel out conversation. But Caroline has actually really given me some encouragement. I actually am really feeling buoyed up by her comments and her ideas, which is fresh for me because I've spent a lot of time sitting in D&I, diversity and inclusion board meetings across the music industry for the last 3 months. I probably spent about 2 weeks of the last 3 months sitting through those. So it's really refreshing to hear Caroline's take on this. I wanted to bring up some of the things that some of the people on that are watching us and saying, like Ashley and Amo, for example, I totally agree. It's like the MPO process, it's definitely got to change. It is, we've all said it, it is convoluted. It's not in the same language. And these are our flagship organizations. These are the ones that we look to. So, we've got to start there, I think. But at the same time, we have to look at, small organizations. Last year, Small Green Shoots supported fundraising applications. I think one of you in the panel was saying you need someone to literally sit down and write these applications. They are not easy. I speak funding. I've been doing this for 10 years, but I am not fluent still. It's a whole nother word. I mean, public engagement, it's like just the entry level stuff is not easy to get through. And
can I take that?
Also, just quickly, we're also talking about small and sometimes low income organizations. Who has the time or the resource to sit down for 3 weeks solid and dedicate your staff to that when you're going to get a rejection? You want to stay in business doing that? Good luck, mate, because we don't have a fundraising department.
Okay, so Francis, there's a pretty clear challenge put down. The MPO process, the whole way, is weighted towards big organizations, people who can afford to put the time and energy and resource into that sort of application. And that's the thing that needs to be challenged. What do you say to that?
Well, it's certainly one of the things that needs to be challenged and changed. I don't think it's the only thing, but it's certainly one of them. And I mean, I kind of recognise that analysis, if you like, that it is can be a daunting process. We're always thinking about how to make that better. And so something like Elevate, which is a program we ran for Andrew, you make me nervous about what to say now. Black and minority ethnic run organisations.
Was that hard, was it?
No. But the program we ran, we've run a couple of rounds, and that's to get them ready to really build their capacity and so forth. And so the round one, there were 40 applicants, and 20 of them became MPOs at the next round. So I think we are trying to do some things. And I'm not suggesting, Natalie, in any way that the race has been run, the road has been run. There's more to be done, and we are just starting work on the next MPO round. This will be something that will be heavily focused on. I mean, in answer to the question, what's the last minute? It was a massive jolt to the Arts Council. The Black Lives Matters, absolutely changed.
What have you changed as a result?
Well, so first of all, we're talking about it. The jolt was the same as others have said, is suddenly it became number one subject. I have not sat in an executive board meeting in the last year where it's not come up. Then on a practical level, we have developed a race and disability advisory groups at our council level, so at the governance level, and I think that's important. So at the top table, and they are supporting and advising on changes that we need to make. So that is from our colleagues on council who are Black and minority ethnic. They are well, challenging us, holding us to account, to be honest. So that wasn't there before this year. I think the conflation with COVID has not been easy, because that has also, that jolt came at the same time. I mean, I know that they don't not quite coterminous, but you know what I mean. And so that's been really tough to think of the long term at a time when we were focused on short-term survival for everybody, including, using up all our reserves, or, we threw all our reserves in and so forth. So those two jolts this year. But what I would absolutely reassure this meeting is that the Black Lives Matters, etc., that has embedded completely in the Arts Council, and that's not going away because COVID's coming to an end and things. It will influence our thinking and how we set targets and so forth from now on. And it really was quite philosophical, the moment, when that became the first agenda item in almost any meeting. And that for me, as a 20 odd year lifer there, was a very big change.
Yeah, I think one of the questions everyone will have, and Jen, I'm interested in your view of this, is everyone knows that there was a jolt. How could there not be? But the question is, how do you make that sustainable so it doesn't become a lot of lip service paid at a moment where there's a lot of scrutiny on this, but a few months, years go by and we drift back into the same old bad old ways. And so, I mean, I know the last thing you want to do is start making policy in a Zoom like this, and nor would I insist you did. But if for those who might say to you, but Francis, the process has been too slow, what would you say in terms of kind of how you're going to respond and how quickly that response will be, whether it's about the MPO system or whatever?
So I'd like to be judged by, the targets we set and how well we achieve them. And they will come out in our delivery plan and from the strategy and so forth. I'd like to be judged on the results of the next MPO round and say, well, we can't change the MPOs, today. The only time that change can happen is when there is a round, an application round, which is coming up. So I think, it does have to be results is the key thing that people want to see. So I'd like to be judged on that. I think the change will probably never be as fast as some people would like it to be. I think that's particularly challenging with the MPOs, with that that 4-year period they run through. I think if you look at things like our open access programs, so whether that's project grants or developing your creative practice, but the success rates for applicants from a Black and minority and ethnic background are slightly above average than the average applicant already. So I think those are the things I think we'd like to be judged on. But I would say that the pace needs to be picked up as fast as we can do it. We are a public body though, and we have to take account of all stakeholders, including obviously government.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Jen, I mean, how do you feel the last 12 months have changed your approach and thinking on this subject?
Pretty considerably for us, and we are doing quite a few kind of concerted systemic things. So one of the things we did was review all of our funds in a huge amount of detail. So we went into to try and understand exactly where the structural points were, where were the blockers, where were the barriers, and what could we do about it. So one of the things that we've pushed really hard for, bearing in mind that we work with partners, we're not distributing our own funding. So a lot of what we have to do is to say, we must do this, and then persuade our funding partners that they are willing to do the thing that we want to do. So one of the things that we did was push really hard for a representation of not the proportional representation of the overall population, but to ensure that we maintain the applicant proportion all the way through a process, so that we don't end up with these drop-offs consistently, which is what we've seen in the past. And with grant funding programs, we've had some success with that. Another thing that we have introduced is a very different approach to how we set up application processes. So our initial application processes have become much, much simpler, and worked really hard with our funding partners, particularly on the grant side, to ensure that they simplify those processes, that they are very, very straightforward and quick to do. And then the decision making at that stage is all led by criteria and priorities that we make, that we work, no, not make, we work effectively and constructively with our funding partners to set those criteria in advance. And then we do it blind. And by blind, I mean that the decision makers in a committee don't get to see the names of the organizations. And that, we have found, has made a really significant difference. So where we have seen in the last year, organizations, funders have said, we really want to fund more Black, Asian, minority ethnic applicants, we've said to them, fine, set that as your priority, and we will filter applications on that basis, and then you can fund them. And that is a thing that we have consistently done. And so we had our first funding program ever that had a 70% approval rate for Black and Asian minority ethnic applicants, which was in itself a pretty dramatic success. But I think it's there's two things about this. So that those kinds of things work, and those are strategic, they're structural approaches. You can apply them across the funding programs that you run. And they will have an impact in the real world. They do make change in who gets funded. But there's a few other things that you have to look at as well. So we've had lots of discussion about the fact that these organizations are typically smaller and financially fragile. They also typically apply for less money. And so even if you manage to get representation by volume, so you manage to sustain the number of applicants throughout a pipeline, it's very, very difficult to sustain the value, because these organizations will value themselves less and they will apply for less. Like, we consistently see across funds that the people who ask for most money are white men. And, you know, women ask for less. And if you're a Black woman, you will ask for even less. And we consistently see that. So for us, I think there's something here as well about how do you maintain the proportion by value. What can we do around the value as well as the volume? I think the first thing is people will talk about the volume. We've got to have a certain amount of representation. That to my mind is simply not enough. You have to look at the amount of money that's going to organizations. And given the size of those organizations and their financial fragility, I think there's something here about setting aside any money, because it's not necessarily a good thing to say to organizations, here's an enormous amount of grant, we're going to give you a great big capital grant and expect you to spend it swiftly. It's quite difficult to expand and spend money in that kind of way. So I think something that puts that, ring fences that money, makes it available to those applicants in some way over a longer term period. How can we be more patient with that capital? How can we develop organizations? What are the systems we can put in place that recognize that this is a longer term project? It's not something we can turn around tomorrow. This is, I mean, as Caroline said, there's a systemic absence here. There's a need of development, which is, you know, 10 years, 20 years worth of work, because we are making up for a lot more than that. We're making up for 100, 150, 200 years worth of underdevelopment of these organizations. So this isn't something that, you know, us all having a moment of consciousness is gonna change. We need to be consistent. We need to be long term. We need to think about how we are setting aside this money for these organizations and over what time period. Patience is always a problem. I mean, Caroline will know this, but patient grant funding is always a difficulty. All organizations struggle with these cycles of grant funding that are very, very, very short. But what can we do to think about patience? What can we do to set aside that money, to make it available for development if it can't immediately go out and grant? How can we support people longer term?
Can I add something to that? So it's not just, again, it's not just about the quantum, or it's also the type of funding. So patient, unrestricted, you know, this type of funding should be like a risk absorption tool for organizations. It should be unrestricted, it should be long-term, it should come with support. It's like an investment, you know, if you invest in and project funding is just, you know, short-term project funding is, and the reporting that comes around that is just hopeless. It just fundamentally, it undermines the very organizations that we are there to support. You know, if you invest in Marks and Spencer's, you can't say as an investor, oh, by the way, I only want you to invest in the bread department, and then you have to report to me specifically around all the bread that you've sold. And if you, as experts, want to change from bread to cakes because they're selling cakes better than bread is, you have to come back to me and get my permission as an investor to make that change for your own organization. The funding system that we currently have is totally unfit for purpose, and it is even more unfit for purpose for the type of organizations that need it most, and that is definitely in the Black and ethnic minority area. And we need to fundamentally challenge ourselves as funders, and I don't think we're doing enough of it.
Francis, that sounds like a gauntlet being laid down. What do you say to that?
Well, I would agree we don't do enough. So that thing, the changes, I'm less clear about, I have to say. So I mean, I'm looking at the chat messages as they go along there, and there's lots of different views there. I mean, the thing I'd absolutely say is we do listen. So we do listen. So a lot of people don't think we don't, or we don't listen enough, or we don't hear, perhaps would be a better word. We do. We spend a lot of time angsting about it. I appreciate that what people want to see is action. So angsting's not good enough. I agree with that. What the solution is I think it's the most difficult one. So I mean, Kevin's work particularly was talking about financing as opposed to funding. So this is interesting about different methodologies for providing money. So whether there's a place for financing equity or loans, and grants, of course, subsidy. And I think it's interesting to think about alternative forms of financing. I don't think that's the answer, but I think it's it could be potentially part of it. I think that the challenge that particularly we face as a public funder is that we receive a very large number. Sorry, well, go back. Somebody asked who's the Arts Council stakeholders in the chat, and I think that's a really good question, because of course they are all sorts of people. They are everybody in the country, but they're also the government who provides the money. They are the organisations we fund, etc., etc. It's a very broad church of stakeholders we have that we have to consider when we're coming up with solutions. But I don't disagree with the need for change at all. I'm just not quite certain what the answer is, if you like. And there have been a number of false dawns, shall we say.
Sure.
Well, sorry, I just think we have all the power and privilege in the world. We really do. And we need to step up. We really, really do. I can't, at the moment, we're looking, we're sitting on £1.2 billion of an endowment, and we need to harness that as well. People, organisations like us with power, privilege, money need to be harnessing every single thing we have. And we need to be fighting that fight and arguing with the people who I know, because I have to do it every day, who are not ambitious enough amongst trustees or stakeholders. We just have to keep pushing, because we can say the things that other people cannot say, and we can push.
I'm going to just wind you up.
We should.
We've only got about 8 minutes left, and I'm going to come to James Doso, who's been sitting very quietly listening away. And I know, obviously, James, you were at the Arts Council, so I'm going to ask you: is part of the problem here all the funding obligations that already exist? So the fact is, the cake is already divided up and handed out to the opera companies and the national theatres and so on. So by the time we actually get down to these projects, there's just nothing left. And actually, what we need is a genuine, dramatic rethink of how we divvy up the money in the first place. Is that the problem here?
Yeah, I mean, public funders sometimes pretend like every new funding round has the means to completely reshape the sector that they're in and make a proposition to the world to say, come apply, everyone's equally eligible. We're going to, subject every application to a fair and equal application process. Whereas we kind of all know that portfolios of grantees don't really change a huge amount with each funding round, and that there's almost like an inheritance and an obligation to that inheritance. And of course, because we're the country we are with the history that we are, that inheritance looks a lot like the arts and culture and creative world of a generation or 2 or 3 or 4 generations ago. And so there's, however, given the rupture of Black Lives Matter and COVID, I genuinely think that this time, more than any other in previous decades, is the one time where the world is up for a complete reshape of everything. And I would sort of encourage funders to be bold and brave and to say, actually, there is a degree to which this is a zero-sum game, and some of you current beneficiaries will start to lose out comparatively, but we're prepared to do that because we want to show the leadership that's required to achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves, paying attention to Black Lives Matter, paying attention to the reinvigorated debate around equity, social justice, class, social mobility, all this kind of stuff. So kind of now is the moment, I think, to potentially do that.
Thank you, James. I knew this would happen. We have 6 minutes left, and of course, we've only just begun to scratch the surface. So I'm going to just come round to everyone and just say, again, in a totally artificial way that kind of only really works on Radio 4, but doesn't really work in the real world, which is if you had one solution that you could bring to bear tomorrow, a magic wand, let's say, something you could make happen, which kind of waved away years of history and convention and all the other things we know that kind of surround this challenge, what would you do? Natalie? You've got a magic wand.
Okay, I've got a magic wand. Burn it down, start again. Simple things, really. And just listen to the people. I speak to young people every single day. They have a lot more answers than you believe. So take it straight to them. They don't waste time.
Okay, Faraz.
One of the things I feel quite passionately about is that actually what I've noticed in the last year is there's been a pitting of companies against each other. So black companies, Asian companies, etc. It's a bit like, you know, there's a small piece of the pie. Everyone wants to fund a little bit. There's only certain winners and losers. So that means that we have to kind of fight against our brothers and sisters who are from other communities. That I think is really, really problematic because actually this community really does stick together. And as we kind of see this money start getting unlocked, and exactly as has been said in many of these conversations, the BLM movement has done that, where people recognize they need to do something different. We've seen a lot of programs, schemes, funding where it's a bit like, we've got this pot of money, it can only go to like 5 companies, but we all want you guys to apply and we'll see who's winners and losers. That is really, really problematic because what you're doing is you're making us fight against each other, and that will cause more long-term damage than you think it will.
Thank you, Faraz. Okay, sorry, we've only got a few minutes left, so I want to ask you to be brief. Andrew, I'm giving you a Harry Potter hat and a little wand. How would you use it?
I've never been to a private school. I always wanted to go. I think that the Arts Council needs to grow some balls and realise that they're the Arts Council, not the Heritage Council. I think that daring DCMS to take direct control over the turn of a handle organisations that would basically kick and scream the moment the Arts Council tried to redistribute its funding, they should call their bluff and they should say, do that. Francis, people like yourself, really, when you are in your dotage and you're sitting in a bath chair, you know, you want to be remembered for doing something really brave and courageous, right? This is your gig. Take the gig.
Right, take the gig. Okay, I'm going to come to you last, Francis, because I think you're getting quite a lot of incoming. You probably deserve to have some moment to come back at it all. But Caroline, first, you're Hermione, so.
Honestly, I would give it to somebody else who knows, who is better equipped, I think, to get the right answer. Actually, I'm not sure I'm the right person.
But if one solution, I mean, you've said quite a lot already.
Yeah. So from my world, I would fundamentally reverse the way our funding system works, so that instead of organizations bidding for money, foundations should be made to bid for impact.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Well, talking of impact, Jen, I'm afraid I've run out of Harry Potter characters because I can only think of 2. So you'll just have to have a magic wand with no character. What would you do? One thing. And if you could be brief, because I want to get to Andrew.
I'll do my best. I think I would want to endow a whole lot of different kinds of organisations. I think one of the things that we see in the social sector is the continued influence of endowments. There's nothing like having very, very long-term money for giving people power. So I would want to not necessarily take that away from existing incumbents, but certainly create a few more new incumbents who have the luxury to be far thinking and to do interesting things with money, and also just the redistribution of wealth, not just income, not just grants, but the redistribution of wealth is the thing that would make the fundamental difference here around the country, but certainly also to different populations.
Okay, and Francis, I'm going to come to you last. Now let's pretend you know this territory. As you said yourself, you've been in the Arts Council for many years. We're going to pretend they don't exist anymore. They can't hear you, okay? So this is your opportunity to wave your magic wand. We won't tell them what you say. We'll keep it just between us. What would you do?
So, first of all, never believe a journalist, right? So they can hear. Andrew, I'm 62, so I'm dated already, thanks. I think, so what I would really like to see is I would like to see our funding equitably distributed. I would absolutely like to see it to reach every corner of this country, every community. Yeah, this is not about saying that the point about setting people against you. It's not about north v south or anything like that. I would like it to be equitably distributed, and I think that is the goal I would like to see, where nobody can say, well, we didn't get a fair share of this, and that would be my perfect world, if you like, where and that for me does not take away the need for funding to be competitively applied for, because there will always be more demand than there is supply. So the idea that it can't be competitive, but I take your point that kind of setting black and minority ethnic led companies against each other in some ways deeply offensive and not helpful, but competitive, but where it ends up equally distributed or equitably distributed, I think would be my thing. The final thing I'd say is, this is a sort of personal point, if you like. I'd like to see a bigger range of tools, so equity, loans, grants. I think grants have good features, but they're a poor and crude tool at times. And I with my innovation and enterprise hat on, I would like to see a range of tools. I think there's a particularly sweet spot in a financial instrument that is a grant and a loan, so where it's part grant, part loan. And I think that's particularly plays to Kevin's work about the creative entrepreneur. So I'm putting my hand up to say I'm interested in people who can be entrepreneurial. So this is not just about more subsidy, everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Francis. Look, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I mean, all I would say is I thought that was a very positive and interesting conversation. I thought, as inevitably, there was a lot more that we could discuss, and I'm sure you will all continue to discuss it. The one thing I take away from what I think a number of you have said, and this absolutely chimes with what's been going on in the BBC. I mean, I've been in the BBC for 25 years, and in that time, like the Arts Council, we've had endless diversity initiatives and big top box ticking exercises. And we are currently in the process of, I think, for the first time, realistically, changing our supplier base and starting to really fund and allow people to make programs who come from a diverse set of backgrounds. And that's because I think, like all the people in this Zoom have said, this feels like a real moment. This feels like a moment that we can grasp and take some risks and really do something different to how we've done stuff before. And from what I'm hearing around the Zoom here, I think you all think that too. And I wish you every success in making that happen. But it seems to me that there is a will here. Now you just have to find the way. Thank you very much for taking part. Thank you, Caroline, Andrew, Faraz, Jen, Francis, James, and Natalie, who's disappeared because she had to go at 5. And thank you everyone else who's joined us in the webinar. I hope that was interesting and useful, and I'm sure you will all carry on the conversation. Thank you very much. Great. Okay. Hi, Caroline. So a little time's passed since the very lively, interesting event. You got any reflections on it?
I think it's really difficult at the moment, because I think everybody is very willing to do things and to change, but we're all slightly at a little bit at a loss. And I thought that it was a really helpful webinar, because we could all sort of share a little bit our frustrations and our challenges, and be quite open and honest about how on earth we're going to navigate all of this. And of course, it would be a difficult topic anyway to navigate. But of course, you've got coronavirus, you've got Brexit, you've got all sorts of things which are just compounding the issue. But I just found it really helpful and informative, actually. So to be able to just discuss the sort of flesh is willing, but the spirit is, what's that expression?
Sorry, I'm on mute. What is it? Yeah. What is it that? Yeah, the flesh is willing, but the spirit is not.
Weak. Yeah, something like that, or the other way around. But anyway, I think there's a lot of energy, and at the moment it's slightly chaotic and slightly unfocused. But I think that will change.
Sure. Okay, and obviously, I mean, it was although it was an hour, it kind of whizzed past, because there were obviously a lot of contributors and lots of very well articulated positions. So I just wonder whether, in having had a moment to reflect, whether there's anything you felt you didn't get to say that you'd really like to say, or anything you've thought about since that you now have an opportunity to say you'd like to share with everyone. Actually,
no. Because what I did feel would have been useful is, I think, maybe having almost like a follow-on conversation with people who are interested, because you're right, it went by very, very quickly. And I think we were just beginning to kind of get to know each other a bit. But we have definitely followed up at Esmée with some of the people on that call. So for me, we can just sort of carry on and crack on. But I think it would have been maybe sharing each other's email, something that would give the opportunity to maybe meet again in 3 months or something. I don't know, but I think that would have been helpful. But no, there was nothing that I felt I couldn't say or didn't say.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I mean, the fact that you're following up, I think, is, probably the most powerful thing you can do at that point, isn't it? It's just to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay. Hi, Jen. Again. So I'm just wondering, little time's passed since that rather lively session we had. What are your reflections?
I thought it was a really interesting discussion. It was very usefully frank. My experience of these discussions is that they're not always, and so it was really good for clear points of challenge to be raised, and for there to be some openness in that discussion. I think we have an advantage at SIB in that we've done sufficient work to really have the data, so we can pinpoint the structural issues, and we have something very clear that tells us where the problems lie. And my reflection, and this is a general one, not specifically to do with this particular issue, but in general, is that the data is still not as good as it needs to be. And so it can be hard. You can have a sense of where things stand, but without actually having the analysis, it's very difficult to know what to act on.
Brilliant. Yes, no, absolutely. And also, I mean, obviously, there were lots of people on the webinar, and it wasn't always easy to say everything one might wanted to say. So is there anything you'd like to add? This is an opportunity for you to throw in there anything that you might have wanted to say but didn't get a chance.
I think the bit where I would have probably chimed in if I'd had a chance at the end is around the idea of using impact or investing for impact, grant funding for impact, as a means of addressing this constellation of issues. I don't think that it will be a good means of doing that. Not because, not at all because Black, Asian, and ethnic minority leaders of organisations are less able to deliver impact, less able to deliver quality work in whatever sector it is that they work in, but because they are consistently under-resourced and under-capitalised. And so the idea that you use impact as somehow a neutral vehicle to level the playing field between large organisations who have enormous capacity and these organisations that don't, I just think is a fallacy. You have to do the investment first. You have to give people the money and the headspace and the opportunities to develop their practice and to develop their work, and then you can start doing that sort of level playing field approach of looking for parity in delivery. And I worry about that, not just, as I say, not just with this group, but I think it would equally be true of women-led organisations, of organisations working in areas of significant deprivation. You just don't have the same set of resources. And again, we just see that in our data. If you take certain approaches to assessing the quality or the impact of delivery, that will necessarily favour large organisations that are well-established, have big staff, and are led by white people.
Super, thank you. Really clear, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jen.
No problem. Is that it? Okay, great.
Hi, Francis. So a little time's gone past since we had that rather lively session. Have you got any reflections, having had a bit of time to think about it?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was a lively session, and I think it's really important that everybody at the Arts Council, including senior leaders, get out and hear the views, concerns, ambitions of audiences like the MeWe 360 one. So it's important that we're out there and hearing that. And events like this, have an impact. I think that's really important to make that clear. I mean, personally, it made me want to commit to work harder on finding solutions in my particular area of work, which is enterprise and innovation, that will support improving diversity. I mean, I guess that message to myself is diversity it's everybody's job, not the diversity team's job. It's everybody's job. And of course, I reported back to my executive board colleagues on the points made during the webinar, as they do when they attend similar events. And that will influence our overall corporate kind of thinking around how to improve diversity. So I was really pleased to be invited by MeWe 360. It wasn't easy, I'm going to have to say that, but I am really glad that I agreed to take part in it.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, no, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, it was. I mean, I thought it was an hour. It did, because the number of contributors and the questions, it did whiz by, and it would be very easy for there to be things that you might have wanted to say, but you didn't get an opportunity to. So, I mean, I think this is an opportunity for you to reflect on that. And are there things that you now would want to throw into the mix that you weren't able to that time?
I mean, I think perhaps I didn't quite articulate and emphasize enough the centrality of diversity in the thinking that led to our new strategy. So Let's Create, which is a new strategy which we're beginning to now deliver. And I was looking back at that and thinking, well, the analysis of the evidence that underpins that strategy, and that was a conversation with over 5,000 people, really presented a compelling case for change in this area. And I think I didn't emphasize enough that this comes from our strategy and talking to the sector, not sort of made up by us in a little dark room somewhere. And I think the point I particularly want to make about that is that we know the issue continues to be a matter of concern because our sector does not yet fully reflect the diversity of England across boards, leadership positions and the wider workforce. So there's a continuity through this, from that thinking on the strategy through the events of it a year ago, and of course the pandemic. And perhaps that's the next point I wanted to particularly get across, and I'm not sure I got it fully across, is that as the cultural sector begins to reset following the pandemic, inclusivity remains a priority for us. And as our cultural sector reopens its doors, no one should be excluded. And to make sure this has the best chance of happening, we've done a range of things. And I've mentioned a number of these things, but I thought it's worth sort of repeating them as a body together. First of all, we've introduced inclusivity and relevance as one of our 4 investment principles to steer future progress. Organisations seeking investment from us will need to set diversity targets and be held to be accountable against them. And we are also working to encourage more diverse applicants to actually apply to our funding programmes. So it's both the question of making sure that people who do apply get funded, but we need to see more people thinking the Arts Council is the place they should be applying for funding. Next, we introduced our equality objectives, and for example, under those we talk about the need to ensure a more equitable distribution of our investment to improve opportunities for everyone, especially those from underrepresented protected characteristics and from disadvantaged socioeconomic groups. So we've been very clear that that's one of our objectives. And all of these things will underpin both our investment and development work over the next 3 years. I say 3 years because that's our delivery plan period, so 10-year strategy, but we're dividing up into delivery periods. And I think I'd finish by saying that our ambition, so the Arts Council's ambition, is that organisations we support are representative of the communities they work in, for a sector that creates access and career opportunities for people from all parts of society, and for the sector's programmes and activities to reflect the culture and talent of creative practitioners drawn from all backgrounds. So that sense of inclusivity and all is where our ambition is for the next 3 years and across the rest of the strategy.
Super. Thank you so much. That's wonderful. Thank you, Francis.